Hey people, Physical Media 3 here. I'm starting my first ever marathon for this channel, the classic Sonic games. So what can I say about Sonic the Hedgehog that hasn't already been said numerous times before? He's probably been talked about on the internet more times than these games have actually sold copies. Sonic the Hedgehog started when—
Oh my god, who the hell cares?
Well, anyway, Sonic has managed to grow in popularity.
Who cares?
I do, so shut up.
Ugh.
Despite its ups and downs and all-arounds, Sonic is overall an entertaining franchise, and for good reason. Now, I had heard about the franchise for the longest time growing up, but I wasn't really interested in it as I was in Super Mario. Still, as I got older and watched cutscenes of various games online, not to mention playing various fan-made games, I slowly became more interested in the franchise. The first game I got physically was Sonic Colors on the Nintendo Wii, and I had a really fun time with it. Granted, some years later it's not as enjoyable as other Sonic games, but I'd still say it's a fun title overall. As for the first ever Sonic game, I frequently encountered it on various emulator sites online before purchasing it officially on the Wii's Virtual Console, and I've since then gotten a few other versions as well, such as the Sonic Mega Collection Plus on PC before realizing it was shit to run on even a compatible PC, since I got the PAL release by accident, the Sonic Classic Collection on DS, the Sega Genesis Classics Collection on Switch, and the Sonic Origins Plus Collection on the Switch, which finally gave people a physical means to officially play the Taxman and Stealth remasters, and is where most of the review footage will come from for widescreen footage for the entire marathon. However, most of what I said will generally apply to the games as a whole, which I will review in the order Sonic Origins places them in, starting with the first game. The official canon story here is that Dr. Ivo Eggman Robotnik wants to take over South Island by enslaving the animals and trapping them in robots to do this bidding, all while trying to search for the 6 Chaos Emeralds. Sonic, our good-hearted hero and a friend to all living creatures, will have none of it and sets out to free them all from Eggman's tyranny while collecting the emeralds himself. Pretty simple story, right? Would make sense for the first ever game in the franchise? Well, not at first. There were so many unused concepts for the game, from having a band to having a human girlfriend, which was scrapped, although they would reuse some of these concepts for later games, such as the crocodile becoming Vector the Crocodile, and the idea of a human love interest being explored in Sonic 06. And we all know how well that turned out! The US distributors even thought of more story concepts that went unused, such as Sonic being desperate to feed his family in an attempt to make the game even edgier, along with the artwork reflecting this as well. I do like the late Greg Martin's artwork for these games. In fact, I think the covers in general are better than the Japanese ones in the sense that they have actual backgrounds rather than the bland ones they usually used. But I think the original Japanese artwork better reflected the intended characterizations, such as Sonic having some occasional bouts of anger rather than always smirking, and Eggman often having a goofy persona to him rather than always looking pissed as hell. So pissed that he'd often change head shape. I have no idea why he did that often. Either way, it doesn't matter much since there are few to no story scenes in the game, not counting the animated cutscenes in Sonic Origins, though they still do manage to sneak some clever storytelling in the game, as in between Acts 2 and 3 of Scrap Brain Zone, rather than a normal third act level, Sonic encounters Eggman, who sends him down to the foundations of the base, increasing the tension. Other touches like the last cutscene do show a nice attempt at storytelling, even if later games do it a lot more often. As for the game itself, it's somewhat bare bones in comparison to later games. You simply run forward, jump, and kill enemies. Overall, I'd say it's pretty nice and simple for the first game, where the use of one button makes sense, though it will become an issue in later games. And not too different from your standard Mario game, but it does have some unique features, even from the start. Firstly, rather than power-up extensions as a life bar, we have rings for that. Take one hit and you drop them all. The more rings you have, the more you can pick back up to save yourself from another killing hit. Secondly, you roll down hills and run through loop-de-loops to gain speed as a reward, though it does become a bit of an issue when you need to backtrack a bit to get up slopes and hills, which thankfully later releases alleviated by adding the spin dash, and the latest releases even go as far as to add the drop dash from Sonic Mania. Lastly, unlike Mario, you can actually go backwards, and this was done to put better emphasis on exploration, which, while not as fleshed out as later games, does offer some neat optional goodies to collect. This ranges from temporary invincibility, speed shoes to temporarily speed up, ring monitors to give you 10 rings at once, and extra lives, which you can also get from collecting 100 rings or enough points, which is very rare, to stop you from getting a game over, which booted you back to the title screen in the original version if you didn't have one of the limited continues. Though thankfully on modern releases we have save states to circumvent that, and Sonic Origins flat out removes lives and continues in favor of the compilation's token system, which can be earned by either breaking boxes where extra lives once stood, or by getting a Chaos Emerald. To do this, you need to collect 50 rings in either of the first 2 acts of the stage and jump into a giant ring at the end of the stage. Don't take too long either, because eventually, Sonic will automatically run off screen, missing your chance for an emerald, and it's very easy to overshoot the ring as well. Not only that, but for whatever reason, Scrap Brain Zone doesn't have giant rings at the end of their stages, which I'm not really sure why. I can understand it for Acts 2 and 3 of the zone since they have story cutscenes right afterwards, but I feel like Act 1 should have had one since it's just a normal stage. And another thing you can do when completing the stage is get some extra points while jumping. Once you jump in, you're immediately taken to an abstract sort of reality where you need to control Sonic through a rotating maze while trying to use the correct bumpers to help steer him in the right direction, while avoiding the goalposts that'll just get you booted from the stage with no chance of trying again unless you're playing the Origins version, where you can try again for a single token. Towards the end, Sonic has to break through a crystal barrier, which can take a bit unless you have a strategy figured out, and then Sonic finally grabs a Chaos Emerald. A pretty hasty task, but fairly simple if you know what you're doing. I will say the maze is pretty impressive for a 1991 Genesis title with how smooth the background is, though the rotating maze is pretty choppy in the original along with the giant ring, but thankfully both run smoothly in the Taxman and Stealth remaster, and the music is just a joy to my ears. The rest of the soundtrack is really good. While the Genesis may not have been as capable sound-wise as the Super Nintendo, games like this prove the Genesis' sound capabilities in its own right. Tunes like Green Hill Zone are constantly remixed for a reason, and not just because the stage is constantly reused in later games, and tunes like Starlight Zone are just beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Complementing the nice soundtrack are some nice visuals for 1991. Every zone looks distinct from each other and helps set them apart in addition to their unique aspects. Green Hill Zone is a nice little starter level that helps players get used to the game's mechanics, and is fairly iconic in its own right with the checkered pattern in the dirt that would be frequently used in reused versions or stages inspired by this zone. Marble Zone is a nice pace changer with its slow-moving blocks. Spring Guard Zone is a nice compromise between Green Hill and Marble Zone, with some moments of slowness and plenty of moments to go fast with enough skill. Labyrinth Zone, yeah, it's pretty slow and not even in a fun way like Marble Zone, and it can get a bit boring after a while. Starlight Zone is personally my favorite zone, with Green Hill being my second, with the lovely scenery and some of my favorite moments of speed and hidden pathways. Scrap Brain Zone is pretty effective as a final level. I don't count Final Zone as a zone since it's just the final boss fight. The boss fights in this game are pretty entertaining. The first one is pretty simple, but they do get challenging as the game goes along. I also like how the widescreen version of the Spring Guard Zone boss adds some gates preventing Sonic from leaving. That was a nice touch. The final zone boss is pretty effective with a lack of rings, leading to some intensity in guessing Eggman's fight patterns. In the end, Eggman flees in his Eggmobile where he manages to escape, or, you know. Afterwards, Sonic travels back to Green Hill Zone and uses the Chaos Emeralds to fill the scenery with flowers, which admittedly is a beautiful visual, but if you hate playing the special stages, it probably won't be worth your time. And if you don't get all the emeralds, you get a couple of pretty funny visuals of Sonic glaring at you for not getting them before doing the same ending pose, followed by Eggman juggling the emeralds. If you do, he stomps on the end text in fury. In addition is a nice little recap of the entire game in the end credits. I think it goes without saying that I feel the first ever game in the franchise is a good example of simplicity working to its advantage, where it may not be deep or complex, but it's still pretty fun and did a really good job laying the groundwork for future Sonic games to expand upon. The gameplay is pretty solid fun, the graphics and sound are excellent, and it lets some iconic characters. There's a reason why it was bundled with the Sega Genesis, and why Sonic became Sega's official mascot since he's just that iconic. And now, it's on practically every game console in existence, so I'd recommend checking it out as long as it's not the Sega Smash Pack or the GBA port. I'd mainly recommend getting it on the Sonic Origins Plus collection, where you can not only play the game in HD widescreen for a better view, complete with some additional enhancements, such as the boss introductions being made automated rather than being able to get some easy hits in to make them harder, and possibly to make them more in line with later classic Sonic games, and their brief cinematics. But the music was remastered, so it sounds even better. In addition, you can play as Tails, Knuckles, or Amy, where you can use Tails' flight ability or Knuckles' ability to climb on walls and discover paths not present in the original game. You can even use a code to do various modifications, such as activating the Insta Shield from Sonic 3. I feel like this version is the best way you can play Sonic 1 nowadays, so make sure to get this version. With that said, I think this is where we leave things for today. Tune in next time for my review of Sonic the Hedgehog CD, where I might piss off a few purists since I don't have access to the worst version on Sega CD. Either way, later!